Hello, and welcome to another week of the Storied Arcs podcast. I am your co-host, Mike.
And I'm your co-host, Alex.
And today we are diving into our spoiler-filled discussion of Unfollow Volume 1, although sometimes we do multiple volumes at a time. Today we are just doing Unfollow 1, so Unfollow 2 and 3. If you've read them, will not be discussed yet, and if you haven't, you're safe to listen to this one. And this is part of our summer of social media. We watch the decline of social media, and really, I think it's not just that the medium itself was corruptible. There is the common thread here of billionaires, like egomaniacs.
The people. Well, because
the ruling class of social media is really what's ruined social media.
The people in charge of it, the people who created it, who curated it in a way, led to its kind of active downfall. I think there is a case, and I think something that I think maybe Unfollow starts to get into a little bit, maybe we'll see it online a little, is the case that left to our own devices, users, the population, the general public, we would eventually get to the same place of devolving whatever technology or kind of app that we have in our hands. And maybe that's true, but what we're very much seeing is the people involved now. Would you say villains? Is that too harsh right now, at least? I mean, now I think we think of them as villains, or we think of them more actively as villains. But, here we are, I should say real quick here, Volume 1, the books that we're covering here, issues 1 through 6, came out November 2015 to April 2016. So again, keep that in mind in terms of where we were as a society in this country and kind of where we were, your own relationship to technology and social media. So at that time,
late 2015, there was early primarying where we all thought the social media flamboyancy of a candidate was funny. And then in early 2016, like, Republican primary actually happens, and it's like, oh snap, you can get nominated for a major party just by being on Twitter.
Yeah. So this
really
book comes out just before that. So we haven't quite hit that yet, but we are, Social Network is 2010, the movie, 2011?
I was going to say 12, but either way, how about this? Timely news. Did you hear that Sorkin has been commissioned to write and direct the sequel?
Yes. Yeah. That seems like a terrible idea.
I am interested to see what my initial impression was exactly what you're saying, but I was like,
okay, sorry.
If it's a post-mortem 5 years later or 10 years later,
let me change that here. The idea of him tackling that.
2010, you were right, by the way.
It's okay. I was trying to think back there. The idea of him tackling that, I think, is potentially interesting. When the blurb about the things he was going to touch on was like,
oh, I did not see that.
It was basically everything that's happened in technology, and which is like way too vast. And the idea of him directing it is terrible. That's a whole other separate idea. But okay, so here we are. The Social Network comes out as 2010, so we're starting to get a bit of an idea of, even though the book that Ben Mesrick had written had come out, obviously prior to that, it wasn't until the movie where people really started to see Zuckerberg, I think, in a different light, and so now we have, so now here we are with our Larry Farrell character, who is our billionaire in our story here in Unfollow, who I believe is meant to have founded like both a Facebook and a Twitter analog. He is credited as the founder of Headspace and Chirper. So I think the idea is that he's Zuckerberg and Dorsey together. Like one person did all of that,
which is safer, from a defamation suit standpoint.
Probably so, but still, it's called Headspace. And
to me, like, the characters are so similar that it's just like, what would even be the point in distinguishing them?
Yeah.
It's like, we don't need two slightly different degrees of villain. We really only need one villain for storytelling purposes.
Yeah, and especially in this story here, the whole point is that this guy is a multi-billionaire several times over.
Right.
So whether that came from one social media app or two, and that isn't the point there. The point is that he is responsible for creating the app, and all of our people, all of our characters ostensibly have some relationship to it.
Right. Yes.
So the way that we have it in our own society, the way that everyone's got most people have some relation to some level of social media, or did at one point, probably more likely 10 years ago when this book was first coming out than maybe they do now. But all that stuff is still kind of in the air in 2015, 2016, early 2016, as this first batch issues were coming out.
Yeah. So I kind of want to jump to what I thought was the crux of this volume,
Sure.
which is the conversation between now this is terrible. I forget our billionaire's name already.
Larry Farrell.
Larry Farrell,
Or maybe I don't think it's Farrell. I think Farrell. I was saying Farrell, not Farrell, but
oh yeah. Either way,
I was saying Farrell. So
okay. I have no. Yeah, I think Farrell. That pronunciation feels a little on the nose, given the subject matter here. But yeah, I Farrell. We'll go with that. And the conversation between Farrell and Akira, I want to say it's like a little more than halfway in. It starts with, "I'm curious, Mr. Farrell, have you read my novel, The Humans?"
Oh, yes.
And Akira says, I find the accusations of plagiarism from artists vulgar and naive, all this lofty speech. And their conversation basically, okay, so then the next page it says, "The fragility of memory of life's acts, sound and fury. You took your idea for the 140 from my novel, The Humans." And he says, "I did. I want to show everyone who you really are." And then Akira says, "Then you know what happens to all bar a handful of the humans in my tale. You know what I'm forced to stand against you to prove you wrong." And he says, "I do." And so basically, this conversation makes you think, or it made me think, that the whole premise of the 140 and the inheritance and everything else was just to expose this one guy he doesn't like as a fraud. But that's silly. So then you have to say, there's nothing at all random about this list of 140. There must be some case, some argument, some string pulling reason for doing this with everyone that's been invited, right?
Yes.
It's like,
yeah.
Like none of this. So like, I just read a tweet yesterday from someone who said, "I was having lunch with a billionaire in New York City, and he left a 500% tip." And I said, "Whoa, that was really generous." And the billionaire said, "Yes, that tip puts her over income threshold for rent-controlled apartments, and she's a tenant in one of my apartments, so now I can kick her out." And it was like, whether that's a true story or not, that is the type of petty thinking that a lot of this billionaire class will do. And like, I immediately thought of this book. It's like, you have $1 billion in an island. Why do you care what this author says in his novel about humans?
Well,
like,
and I think the way I read it and the way I've always read it here is that it's not so much a like personal attack against Akira, the author. I think it's like he read the book and was like, you know what? I don't know if I agree with this.
There's such a misguided view of humanity.
Yeah. And so it is not the rebuke of him personally, it's the rebuke of the idea presented in the novel, which I guess you could extrapolate into, so
I think he also doesn't like the guy.
But okay, so this is what I'm saying. I don't know if you can particularly take out any kind of personal animosity. I that maybe so. I never read it that way, and I didn't read it again here. It's less about a personal thing. It was like you wrote this book that a lot of people read and a lot of people connected with, and you have themes in this book that I disagree with, or I think either that I disagree with about humanity. So with my dying wish, I'm going to prove you wrong or attempt to prove you wrong because I disagree with that. But I don't think I don't think it's implied that these two know each other. They've ever met or talked to him. So I don't think any personal animosity. I think it's a matter like
no, I don't. Yeah, I didn't quite mean it like that. I think I just meant like he thinks this guy is a pompous windbag and wants to take him down a notch, and
maybe so. Maybe it's,
because of his writing, he thinks he's like
maybe okay.
He's
okay.
pompous.
I can see that,
and I think there is this thing of like. People, I forget who said it in an interview, but one person always said like, everybody likes to pretend like, well, if I had $1 billion, I would do this, this, and this with it. And it's like, no, you wouldn't. There's just no evidence of that. And granted, the person I was listening to was arguing just against the existence of billionaires, just saying like this class should not exist. The human mind at this point cannot comprehend, that kind of money, and what it does to a person is just totally corrupting. And I think that is Farrell's final shot here, is saying like, people think this, and this about me. I'm going to show them what even the idea of accessing this money will do to them. Like even accessing one 140th of this money will start to unlock the true nature of people, including Akira. And I cannot wait to see Akira's fall from grace as I read this.
Well, I guess. What is,
if you can even call it, if that he was even once standing in grace?
Well, but I guess the way you can look at it though is based solely on this page here and on this issue, which I think is issue 4. Maybe it's issue 4 or 5. I lost.
Oh
track
yeah, I'm
here.
trade only. So
yeah. I think it's issue 4 here when this happens. They speak in vague terms about who believes what about humanity.
Right.
So. At this point, you don't know what view of humanity that Akira put in his book, in The Humans. Did everyone get along? Did everyone turn to animals? You don't know which side he comes down on, or which side his book came down on. Thus, you don't know what side that Farrell comes down on, because obviously it's simply the opposite there. But in this moment right here, that's left up into interpretation. And now we can see what happens, and we see what begins to happen almost immediately. I mean, before they even get to the island, the number drops from 140 to 139.
Yes.
So and they're already told, they're told off the bat, like, hey, when you started the day, you were getting this much, but if you check your phone, it's down to 109. You're all getting a little bit more. And then by the end of this episode, the one middle-aged guy from London who was on the beach earlier in the night, he washes up on shore. They find him, so we're down to 138. And so we're getting we as the reader now are getting a sense of what the main drive of the story is going to be. Right, we're kind of regardless of what's happening meta-wise in the story, because there's a countdown clock on the covers. So I guess, by the way, like, spoilers, if you really don't want to know what's going on at this point, after you've read this much, if you look at all the covers for the rest of the series going forward, the icon in the corner of each cover that starts at 140, it begins to count down. It starts a countdown here. So if you see the single issues, you see all of a sudden it goes down to 139, 138. We as the readers see what's happening here. That because of, even though they've left the island, right? Whenever someone dies, whatever they have left goes back to the estate and gets redistributed to everybody else. So it's not just a matter of, oh, when Farrell died and you got your money, that's it, everybody go home. It's like the redistribution of funds still continues essentially until there's only one person left.
Which is really interesting because before I knew the premise, I thought it would be anytime someone gets died, they redraw from the rest of the population of humanity. So it would be the 140 of them against the world.
So that means
that would be the Kyle Starks version, the real bloodbath. Because Kyle Starks did the same thing in Assassination, where it has the gallery of characters with it starts crossing them off at the beginning of each issue, and you're kind of tracking them, and like half of them are wiped out in the first issue.
Yes, all gone. Yeah.
So Yeah, he loves the bloodbath. So anyway, it is a more interesting premise to say the pool gets smaller and smaller, and the shares get larger and larger the more this happens.
Yeah.
And
And that it's continual, that it doesn't end with the money, like when they forget their first deposit. You know, the fact that it can go on in 5 years, 10 years, 20
now, my
years.
understanding that like even if you got that first deposit and then you die, that deposit is withdrawn. Like you couldn't even give that to your family
I, I, that is uncertain, and
because
ultimately it may not really matter, you know?
correct, except that all of the
But
people, the St. Louis guy, everybody who wants to extort him,
yeah.
I'm like, they're planning to threaten him, but they should really be trying to keep him alive. They should be
Yeah.
like, hey,
Well,
literally pay us for protection. We will protect you from the other 137. And
Obviously, they don't know
you keep
that.
the money going into the community.
Yeah,
Right.
they obviously don't know that. Yeah, yeah. But that is a good question. So, like, let's say after 5 years, and you've got, you know, whatever. Is every deposit 100,000? I don't know, whatever it is, if it's monthly or whatnot. So that's what million and
Barely enough
like
to get
seven.
by on, really.
But
I know.
I'm saying, like, after like 5 years, what you're saying is after like 5 years, and you've accrued maybe like $5-6 million or whatever it is, and you haven't spent frivolously, and you were to die, does the money you accrue go back to the estate as well, versus plus everything you haven't gotten yet? That's an interesting question. That's an interesting question. And again, I don't think ultimately it matters too much, because we're talking about, you know, percentage points over, like, I mean, we're talking about everyone who's left getting an extra, like, you have 130 some odd $1 million, and now you're getting $132 million, you know.
Yeah.
For most of these people, that's not going to make a difference, because it's already so far beyond whatever they could imagine before.
Right. Yeah. The funny thing is, it kind of proves the point in a different way, because I've been thinking of all of these ways. I was like, okay, if I was in this scenario, what would my play be? And I think until this pool gets small enough, I would be try to make myself a very public figure of like, hey, I've got all this money coming, and here's what I'm doing with it. I'm giving it back to the public. I'm funding public work projects. So anyone who tries to come after me is literally a public villain, and the public has a vested interest in protecting me, keeping me alive. And that's just as cynical as anything else going on here.
Yeah. It's like a passive cynicism versus an active one, right?
Right. Well, I mean, it is saying like, oh, I'm going to do these good things with the money, but it is self-preservation in the same way that everyone else's is. And like, honestly, as cynical as that is, I really wouldn't mind one of our billionaires being that type of cynical. Just saying like, hey, I'm going to fund like public works projects and things like that. I will single-handedly do this disaster relief or something like that. You know, they would raise the whole question of public-private help, like Iron Man 2. You know, if I've successfully privatized
war. Yeah, world peace. Yeah. But
that guy.
I think but again, I think that speaks to the idea of like, yeah, that's a wildly cynical thing, but in terms of in comparison to where we are with our other tech billionaires, like, it's not actively evil, you know. It may be actively self-serving,
right,
but it actually, there's a defined and achievable net positive. And so simply because there's that morsel of potential good, that you and I agree with you. We're like, well, yeah, we'll take the egoism and the cynicism of it, because there's actually something good that can come out of it. That's where we are, just because you're not actively trying to be evil. You're not actively trying to destroy the world. Just because it's something else, it's still just as look at me, look how great and important, and look at the great thing that I did. It's like, we'll suffer that if you just, you know, help us fix the damn road or something, you know?
Right. Yeah, the bar is so
low.
effing low.
It's so low. It's so low. So yeah, but I mean, I think even what we're seeing here from Farrell is this isn't even that, right? This is him saying, I'm going to give my money to people and let these quote unquote random people, because I'm with you there. There's a lot of iffiness on the randomness there. in terms of who gets selected. But for now, we'll call them. I'm going to give them to these random people and redistribute the wealth that way, and let it basically say, let's see what they do with it.
Right.
Or I'll put it in the regular person's hand, the common people, everyday people's hands, distribute it amongst all these different people, and see how they decide. Do they improve the world? Do they make their lives better? Do they make their communities better? What do they do with it? And so, yeah, it's even more of a passive, hands-off kind of thing. And even that, in my mind, is a step up from where we are now.
Right.
That's even better than that. Marginal step is better than the way we see our tech billionaires see the world today. So, even then, this is still 2015, still a very cynical view, and doesn't even scratch the surface of where we are now. And again, the thought that anyone would play a game like this, although I was thinking about this now, that on some weird level, this is like a hands-off version of Squid Game.
Wait, so I never saw Squid Game,
But okay, so
I get the premise.
the idea of Squid Game is very much this: that there's 265 some odd contestants in a game and one giant pot of money. And the idea there again is the more people die, the more money every person gets. And at any point in the game, everybody can decide to walk away and take what's there, or you stay to the end and get everything. So it's the same kind of idea, but the underlying sense is that it's all funded by a bunch of terrible millionaires who just they want to watch people kill each other. So that's an active participant where they are putting their finger on the scale to make people kill each other because that's what they want for sport. But the prize is still the same. Here, what Farrell has set up is that passive version of, if everyone walks away right now and agrees that like we're all good with this, everybody gets their 130 some odd million. But there's that note, and there's that little piece in the back of the mind of, well, if we took out one more person, everybody gets a little more. And if we took out two of them, everyone gets a little bit more. And it's not designed to do that, but because the possibility is there, they're playing on the idea of what, like, base human nature, right? They're tempting people with the possibility by letting them know it's an option. Not saying this is the point of the game, which is what Squid Game is. Squid Game was like, you are here on this secluded island, and we're going to make you kill each other unless you can all decide together to leave. And then in which case, you're traumatized by what you've done here. Here, you're bringing everyone together, and it's like laying the cards up, being like, well, you could do this. If someone dies, everybody gets a little more money. Doesn't matter how they die. It could be natural causes. It could be because, you hunted them down. Who are we to say? And so just by putting it out there on a platter for them, it's like it's Farrell giving himself plausible deniability or something like that.
But again, if he's really on his deathbed, what does he need plausible deniability for?
Yeah.
But that's a separate issue.
Yeah, the idea of him being like, what, like the last thing before I die is I wanna say I did this great thing,
right?
To what, like appease his own mind or whatever. Yeah, you're right there, but that does feed into the same idea of the ego of the billionaire, right? Of this kind of person saying, right, like my last act is going to be this grand gesture of whatever.
People will be talking about me.
Yes,
and it's a way of kind of reaching
it,
from the grave and saying, even after I die, I'll still be the center of attention.
They're going to remember this thing that I did. The thing that I started, that kicked off was, yes, that's right. That the legacy aspect of it all. That is, that's why so many of these people do anything ever, right? It's because they want to be remembered in some way, and this is in our story here. This is what Larry Farrell's trying to do.
Yeah, So I know we've skipped whole swaths of characters. Mm-hmm. The journalist, if I read the pitch document for this, I would think the journalist would have been the most interesting character to me. I feel like Volume 1's still just laying pipe for that character.
I think my one thing that I didn't quite remember about this book, because I hadn't reread it in a while, was a lot happens, a lot is introduced in this first arc, but there's still kind of a slow burn aspect of like you don't know, like things happen so quickly, nothing gets to sit in, right? Nothing
Right.
like it moves so quickly that you can't grasp on any idea, and so you don't know how much has actually happened. You don't know how much is actually important. It moves so fast, and part of that is you're throwing all like everyone. It's what, maybe 7, 8 names you have to know, right? The journalist is Ravon. There's Dave, the kid from St. Louis. There is Courtney, Courtney, who is the rich girl.
Oh yeah.
There's Akira. There is the survivalist who just goes by Deacon, right? Then there's Larry Farrell, the millionaire. There's Rubenstein, the masked killer guy. There's the guy from Nigeria who, so like we're like 7, 8 characters here that thrown in, and you're uncertain if any of them are supposed to be the main character or important, or are they all main characters? So,
Right.
but I think if I were along the same lines that you were saying, if you read the pitch document of this, I think for me, I also would have looked at the Ravon character, the journalist, and be like, okay, well, she's got to be the main character, because or she would be the point of view character, because
Right, because it's so easy to write narration from the perspective of a journalist.
she's the instant her her in story role is audience avatar, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Well,
She is being told explicitly, you are here to make a record of what happens. Like that is her explicit her explicit charge that Rubenstein gives her, that she says, that this is why you're here, you're doing this. And so you would think, and we do get narration from her, but we get also from other characters as well. And I think that can be a little off-putting and disconcerting. You're getting so many perspectives right there. Like you're getting everyone's perspective versus one storytelling perspective. And so I can see, and I wonder if these comments are out there of there's some disorientation reading this first volume, because you not just jumping from character to character, but because you jump into each character's perspective.
look, I'm so glad you said it, because I had to restrain myself not to say it, because I feel like that's always my complaint. Like anytime there's more than 3 characters, I'm like, I'm not going to learn everyone's names until I'm convinced they're important.
But also I think, and I know you've always said that when it's number of characters there, and that's obviously that happens in a number of
POVs too. Yeah.
Well, that was my specific note about this book and this volume, is that it's one thing to get a bunch of different characters. It's another thing to get them from all their POVs, and getting focus on their stories. And we start to get really into that at the end here of this volume, which is issue 6, which I mentioned last week, is that there are a handful of guest artists who come in here, and that issue, which focused kind of on Deacon's backstory, was drawn by Aram Guerra, with colors by Julia Brusco, just to bring in, I think bring in a different style, a different look, because they're focusing on a character. I think also, again, a practical standpoint of just giving our regular art team a bit of a break to either catch up or get ahead. So you even in this first volume, you start getting a sense that maybe we're going to get more of those.
Yes.
Right. That we're going to start kind of drilling down on a couple of these characters and get a little more of their backstory and an understanding of maybe how they fit or why they were chosen at quote unquote random to be part of the 140. So you start to get a bit of that setup here, but you're right. There's so much of it is laying pipe for what's coming next. So much of it is set up in this first volume.
The most meaningful arc, perhaps just because of where it ends, is Dave.
Definitely,
tracking with Dave early, but he actually gets like an arc rather than a setup. There's a little bit of like payoff and forward movement.
Yeah, and I think it especially when we're on the island, so much of what we see is through his eyes.
Right.
From that initial kind of look around and him being off put, like, this is crazy. like him thinking maybe, he's seen the visions of the various big cats and whatnot, and him having the freak out and then showing up, ending up at Deacon's door and then injuring him and then going off with Ravon a little bit. So yeah, we see and track him through. And plus we also got some of his backstory in St. Louis. And then we see him after as well. And I wanted to that's a good transition here. Because we talked about this a little when we talked about Hacktivists, the idea of integrating real life events and into your fictional story, and how those events and how citing them and referring to them, how that maybe does or doesn't play in a story that comes out a few years after those events happened, and also now significantly more time after those events happened. So remind me again of your timeline. Were you in St. Louis?
Yes, I moved there September or August 2013.
Okay.
So I was there and established, like, I had already sent like messages to people in Cincinnati and from Cincinnati, like friends saying like, wow, I know, I'm like, St. Louis is not even the South, but it is noticeably more racist than Cincinnati. And most of my friends were really like, well, it's not great here. And I was like, I know. And I was like, maybe it's just because I have like fresh eyes, but I see it in St. Louis. But like petty traffic stops, I also experienced one of those. Obviously, mine was not as dramatic. Mine was just a little shakedown. They've got like 60 municipalities that like I got a ticket in the city of Rock Hill, which I had never heard of until I got a ticket there. No. And I looked it up on a map, and it's like maybe a mile of road. And they fund that whole municipality
by setting up by
speed traps. It was 25 miles an hour, and I was going 28 and got a ticket, and it was printed on the ticket. I was like, I think it's great that you're not embarrassed to print 28 miles and a 25 on a ticket. So proud of you guys. So anyway, it was already in the air, and then when it happened, I was like, least surprising thing ever. Still as like angering and outrageous as it should have been, but and it was also like, none of these things are ever isolated events. There was the string of them. There was the kid with the toy gun around the same time, and then there was a kid with like, I don't like, was it something as silly as like a box of cereal or something, or a candy bar?
It was all kinds of things there. So you were in the area for Ferguson in 2014. That's all I wanted to establish.
Absolutely, yes. So protests on my neighborhood, my street, my block.
So I'm curious now. So we talked about it with Hacktivist, going back there, how they brought in the events in Tunisia and what was known as kind of the Arab Revolution at the time. That was 2010, 2011 kind of thing. So here we got a book that is set. It's set in like 2015, 2016. Canonically in the story itself. Jumping back just a handful of years to the events in Ferguson, events that you were at and witnessed there. So I'm curious, what were your thoughts when you saw that one of our characters here, this Dave character, was from St. Louis, and he is a black man, and so you're maybe thinking about where that could lead to, and then seeing it tie in so specifically to an actual event. And knowing and them commenting a little bit on how social media not so much factored into it, but like what its presence was at the time. There's that, it's kind of a chilling thing to read even now, when it says, that people in Palestine were using hashtag solidarity with Ferguson and giving brothers advice on how to deal with tear gas. They're living in rubble and bombed out buildings, man, and they're trying to help us. So right. There's a touch of that of this kind of social media aspect there. But what were your thoughts seeing that, and again, how a book like this uses the actual recent past to help kind of sell its message?
Yeah, to me, this one's very different from Hacktivist because it did not feel like they were taking credit for something that happened in the real world. Rather, they were just tapping into like it was almost like I think the only objection to it would be that it's like a little fourth wall of saying like instead of explaining to you what this character's life is like, we in 2015 are going to say it's a black kid from St. Louis
Yeah.
because it fills in so many gaps in the reader's mind that it's less work for world building because you're just relying on the reader to import all of that with them. And I think that it's not like a hack move or anything, but it's just like a little lazy in like I'm not even sure in a bad way. It's just like it is a little lazy. I think a guy like George R. R. Martin would be like outraged by that of like how dare you rely on the reader to provide anything instead of spelling out every excruciating detail.
So I guess, and that's actually well, first of all, I agree with the first point. That was in my notes. There's this idea of not having social media take credit for anything, simply stating how it was used in the moment. I definitely agree with that. I like what you said about it being a shortcut to character, because that actually brings me to another point that I had that was unrelated to this, but now it actually makes total sense. Because I don't think we've said their names yet. Writer Rob Williams and artist Michael Dowling. They're our creators here of Unfollow. I don't know if we said that on top or not, but they are both British individuals. They do not live in America. They're not from here. So knowing that and knowing what was in the air here and how that permeated around the world, I'm changing my question here now, but to focus on what you said there, does that change the way you might think about how creators might use a shortcut like this, in knowing that they were looking at this from the outside, from a different country, from a different place, and saying that is how what we, instead of them trying to fill those details in because maybe they can't, they are wanting to use that because they don't know any other way and they know what that can invoke. Does it change anything if you know that our creators aren't like they weren't in America at the time and they're not American? Does that shortcut feel
Less earned or something?
Not less earned, but more reasonable.
Yeah, I mean, yes and no. Like, again, I think this is a good shortcut to use, especially when you're doing an ensemble book. Yeah. Like, anything you can do to help the reader get the character as quickly as possible because you're going to carpet bomb us with so many characters. Now,
that's a good point.
If this was if this was the book we were describing earlier, like a single POV character, and they were kind of using lazy shortcuts of like, here, you fill in the blanks and tell us about this character, that would be uncool. I think it's a great way to do it for the genre of book that we're in. And actually, because they're all being archetypes to some extent. Like the journalist is an archetype.
Yeah, like you could pick any kind. They want a journalist, right? So you could pick a journalist anywhere. So who do they pick? They pick a woman from Iran, you know?
Exactly. Yeah.
And so, yeah, when she's being tortured there, when she's being tortured before right as Ruben Sheen recruits her to the 140, that you're right. They're relying on the audience just to know, be like, oh, right, this is someone who's put themselves in harm's way simply by existing. You know, this is not some white American person who has the force and might of and the backing of the U.S. and the U.S. media machine. This is a woman putting herself online. This is an Iranian woman going in and doing the work like that. So you're right. There's an archetype there. Obviously, our rich heiress girl is kind of the flighty drug taking white girl, right? The party girl. Right. You know, and so immediately right there, you know, from the jump who that is supposed to be. I think they do that with Akira as well, right? He is the eccentric, pseudo intellectual. I guess at this point we'll say intellectual author, right? When you see him, he has two prosthetic legs. He has the face tat. You know, not quite the Mike Tyson. It's a little more detailed than the Mike Tyson, but he's got that there. When he shows up on the island, he is wearing a wedding dress, or kind of a modified wedding dress there. The signals are just like, this is the eccentric intellectual.
Yes. I mean, yeah.
Sorry, even Deacon, right? He's our survivalist guy. And they even did another thing. I actually, is it later in my notes? It is in my notes there. For some reason, he was at Abu Ghraib, right? And they have the pose of the...
And that's another shorthand, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So you know who this guy is, and the fact that he's recruited from Alaska. And he's got, you know, So he's a survivalist out there, but you know what his background is. You know he's military background. And yeah, Abu Ghraib is that's a trigger as well of just, oh, okay, that person. And so yeah, you instantly have who these people are, and then they can play with those expectations a little bit there, I guess. Because as you mentioned, Dave has a bit of an arc. He actually has an arc here because we see his introduction is him protecting his sister. Like, I'm gonna be like, you have forced my sister to commit this crime, but I'm gonna be here since I have no other choice, right? I'm gonna be here to help her. And then when we see him though, like on the island, and when he gets money at that point, we see him like, so I guess we're meant to see Dave initially as like a good person, or like kind of a bit of a white knight aspect.
I think so. Yes.
Right. And that's why. So while we see him and his sister Devin there at the Ferguson kind of protests. We see him. He's the one that has a bit of clarity at the opening party on the island of like, this is crazy. Like
right. Just because we're all going to be rich now doesn't mean we behave like this.
Yeah. But when he gets off the island, what's he do? The first thing he does is throw money around, right?
Yeah, which I think in his mind was like, this is me taking care of the community, and like I'm spreading the wealth around. Which, like, you know, very interestingly, did you ever read Trevor Noah's book that was like a memoir of his life?
Oh, no. That what is that?
Born a Crime.
Yeah.
Really good. But in it, he talks about what he calls he calls it like the societal, like, black tax. And what he means by that is like, there is something in the Black American conscience which says to you, if you are the one to make it, you owe your family, your community, everyone around you, all of this money. And he said, you know, not only is it a longer shot to make it for a black man in America than a white man, most white men who make it, which, you know, he's not minimizing the effort there or anything. He's just saying most white men who make it, what they make is theirs. And like, they keep it because their parents are fine. Like, their sister's fine. And he said that's just not the case in a lot of black communities. And he said, you know, he feels the need to be providing for his family back in South Africa. And so he feels like, you know, just because I made it and I made this money doesn't mean this money's mine. And I wonder if there's a little bit of that with Dave, or if they're trying to depict him as reckless. I actually think if they were using the former, that would be a more informed, intelligent take on the character. If they're just saying, oh, this guy's an idiot, look at him throwing away all this money, that would be a little disappointing to me. But still, you know, I'm sure that character's out there.
Oh, definitely. I think with a character like Dave, given what we've seen with him, I wonder if it's a little bit of less that it's reckless, but more him at this point, like maybe he initially saw like this money as a gift, right? It's a boon. And then he gets to the island, sees what's happened. I wonder if there's a little bit of him feeling like it's a kind of bit of a blood money and like he doesn't deserve it now. And so he's just going to be frivolous with it, not because he's reckless, but because he doesn't want it.
Yeah.
You know, it's that sort of thing, right? You know, he's going to throw this out and throw a big raver and give this away because he feels dirty having it.
Yeah. I think that's a good read.
Yeah.
Because it's not like he doesn't have a wish list of things he would want to buy with it.
Yeah, or do with it. Yeah, and of course we see him at the end there, right? What happens? He ends up accidentally shooting his sister. You know, while he's still seeing like leopards and panthers and stuff, and so like I think it's fairly clear at some point. I think by the end there definitely that he knows he can provide. He's like, yeah, you know, the last bit there says, nurse asked about your medical insurance, but I'm told you've requested her sister be traveled to a private hospital. And it's basically like, yeah, I'm good for it. You know, right. Like I've got the money for it, which doesn't matter to him because his sister, his sister's in a coma now. because of him, because of the money. So it's like, great, you've got the money to take care of your sister who is in this condition because you got this money in the first place and didn't feel like you deserved it or should have it or anything like that. So yeah, I think that's a lot to do for one character out of, again, over a half dozen so far. But seeing that, I think it gets you start getting a glimpse, I think, of what you can expect for some of the other characters that they've introduced. And again, specifically the ones who get a bit of a spotlight. We've already talked about Dave, Courtney, Ravon, the journalist, Deacon, the survivalist,
yeah.
Akira, the author, and then clearly whatever's going on with Rubenstein, with the mask. And I love what they do with the lettering here, that Clem Robins does for Rubenstein in the mask. The fact that it gets all wavy and weird, which evokes,
I love
like he's speaking
everyone
to a
the
vocoder.
mind tricks of like, wait, did your eyes just move on the mask?
Yes.
Like all of like just how freaking creepy it is.
Yeah. But then when he takes the mask off and he speaks, his lettering, his text is the same as everybody else's.
Right.
So the idea that the mask is obscuring his voice in some way, like it's going through a vocoder or whatever it is. And yeah, obviously it is either moving or causing visions. There's this some level of almost supernatural fantasy aspect here. Are people just going crazy? Are they seeing things? What is it? But there's that level there, and seeing that again through the letters that Clem Robins does, and because you get that from Rubenstein before you know anything about him. The first time you see him, he's chasing that one guy off a cliff on the island, and he's wearing the mask, and so you get his crazy letters and what his speech is. And it isn't until later when he takes it off and like, oh, this guy's just a person who works for Larry Farrell and he talks like everybody else. And so you're meant to question, like, what is going on with this mask here? What's happening? So that's just like another layer about kind of put on that's introduced in this first 6 issues, which again can be a lot. And because things move so quickly, and I got to tell you, in terms of remembering what happened, I didn't remember all this stuff happening in the first arc. Like them getting to the island and then everyone leaving the island again, that happening in the span of like an issue and a half. Like I didn't remember that happening in the first issue, like in the first arc. I thought there was a more prolonged time there, just the way that my memory had kind of filed this book away. So I was a bit shocked. I was a bit shocked going back through and being like, oh right, they throw a lot at you in this first arc.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Well, and like the inverted season on Lost, you feel like, okay, but we're not done with the island.
Yeah. Well, obviously, because we see, Akira he's been there a day and he's already started a cult, or of whatnot, and of people who clearly have decided that their best course of action is to stay on the island and live in peace and harmony and not kill each other, theoretically, which that on some level seems like a kind of rational conclusion.
My only pushback about the whole Akira thing is like he is not who I think of as an intellectual. I think he's like kind of the mystic intellectual, where it's like you really try to seem deep by being obscure, and it's not the type of obscurity that an academic or a philosopher would have.
Yes.
It's like the type of obscure that someone who's really into astrology would have.
What I was going to be, because his book The Humans comes out in 1999, the thing that my mind jumped to was the Matrix, and like I love the Matrix, but like, and I think the Wachowskis are pretty cool and interesting, and they've done some good stuff. But like, it would be like saying the Wachowskis are the deep thinkers and the true seers of what the world is like,
Right.
Because you can take the Matrix and you can break it down and see it through all these different lenses of what reality is and society and all of faith, religion, and philosophy, all this stuff there. But ultimately, like, it's a really cool action movie, like at its core, you know?
Right.
And so,
Well, and I
and
think
so,
that was what they missed was with the sequels, right? Was like
yes, yeah,
they misunderstood where they got their clout from. It
yeah,
was a great action movie that
with some
had
cool ideas.
wonderful archetypes, cool ideas
Yeah.
that anyone could like kind of graft into their framework and use. Because yes, I heard Christians say like this whole thing's a Christian allegory, and I've heard trans people say this whole thing is an allegory for being trans. The red
Hmm.
pill and the blue pill like are
Hmm.
so obvious. And look at the Wachowskis. Like
Yeah.
this was
Yeah.
obviously the journey they were documenting. So like it's so obvious to everyone. And then the sequels muddy the waters so much.
Yeah.
Still, as a philosopher, very interesting philosophical conversations, but it doesn't feel like they have a point anymore. Like now they're just kicking up dirt and asking questions,
Yeah.
and they're doing it so specifically that they're actually taking away people's ability to
Yeah.
interpret freely,
Yeah. But so,
which
but
was
so,
kind of the beauty of it.
but so you take, so coming off the Matrix, you take what the Wachowskis did there, and then they become deified figures, and people look to them for all the answers because, and all they do is say
Right. I
vague,
don't remember
general,
them weighing in on
larger.
the 2000 election. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
it's like,
Yeah.
why would you ask the Wachowskis about
Yeah. Yeah.
a politics of, you know, how
But
our country should be
that's
run?
the character that Akira, I think, represents. That track,
Yes.
someone who does something that I'm sure in the world of Unfollow is meant to be like a great work of literature. Like it wasn't popular for no reason. I think it's meant to be like a lot. You know what? Maybe it's meant to be like Snow Crash by Neil Stevenson. You
Oh,
know?
the only Neil Stevenson I've read is Seven Eves,
Okay.
and I started Cryptonomicon. Didn't
Yeah, yeah. Snow Crash is that book that like I I
is it
can't get
shorter?
past. Well, no, my biggest problem, honestly, with Snow Crash is that the main character is named Hero Protagonist, Hiro Hero, and I just
No,
yeah,
yeah, no.
but it is a book that like any like kind of neo proto tech geek read and was like, this is the answer to everything. It's like that. And that those kind of creators then ascended to this place of like, well, this person wrote this book or they made this movie or they told this story and they have all the answers. And then that person being like, you know what? I do have all the answer.
Right. Yes.
It's not being, it's them. It's like buying into your own myth. And I feel like that's what Akira is here is that but I part of me also believes that he truly believes he has all the answers. He believes he is elevated, that he is somehow more evolved and thinks deeper and sees past everything that the rest of us mere mortals cannot. And it's like he can't even be bothered. Or it's either you're with him or you're not, right? You either buy into what he sees and he accepts you, let's go, let's do this thing, or if you're not, then he's kind of like, all right, fine, whatever. Like you haven't reached my level yet. Maybe you'll get here, but like I'm not going to do any work to help you up here. But when you see what I see, you'll come over to my side. Like he's that level of delusional
Yes.
towards the rest of the world.
Yeah. So it's interesting that we've had such a lightning rod to Akira, and again, the Akira and Dave, I think, are the winners of this volume.
Yes.
Although clearly everything is playing out the way Farrell intends it to. It's still unclear what he intends,
Yeah.
but he is not dissatisfied with the results he's gotten so far.
Yeah, it is whatever plan he had seems to be going towards it,
Yes.
For good or for ill, whatever he wanted to see, whatever, and I guess maybe from the specific idea of like whatever the initial reaction was to this, whatever the first blush gut reaction to all of this, he got what he wanted, which was, you see that news coverage of like of his name is out there, so he gets that legacy thing. So people are going to be talking about it, and then I think the reaction of the people immediately on the island, what happens, what they do, and then kind of what happens as they go home, or some of them go home and then some of them stay. I think all of that. I think if from what we've seen of Larry Farrell, like he feels like he's winning here or he's won it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Any other notes? I I mean, first of all, anything about the art, not just. So I feel like everything
Yeah,
we've talked about so far is the writing,
a lot of it.
and
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think it's as far as an ensemble book goes, which is not my jam. I think it's pretty well crafted.
I think there is good, there's distinctive enough character design. And I think that is there is sometimes an issue with some artists where you can kind of get little same facey, where the only way you can tell someone apart maybe is like, oh, they've colored her a little darker, or that guy's got a little different haircut. But I think what Michael Dowling has done here is you there's distinctive enough bits about everyone, Ravon has a shaved head and the black eye, you know. Uh Dave is wearing kind of the droop beanie there. As long as he's wearing that, that's Dave, right?
Right. Yes.
Um Deacon is, well, he's a survivalist, right? So obviously he's got the crazy wild hair and the crazy beard, you know? So there are, Courtney is the blonde girl in the cute dress. So like they've done enough here, I think, and put enough work in to give these archetypal characters very distinctive looks. And so yeah, you don't get confused there. I was trying to think, I couldn't find it because I couldn't think of one. I was trying to think of a good comp for Michael Dowling's our art for someone else I've seen, and honestly, I couldn't think of it. If I think of it later on the line for maybe as we get
I think there are
other discussions there,
shades of Andrea Sorrentino, but
a little bit, a
quite
little bit.
distinct.
Yeah, there's a little bit there. I think in some of the in character design, Sorrentino likes to have a little more abstract kind of background paneling, a little more chaotic. Especially a lot of his horror stuff, which is what he's known for, obviously stuff that he does with Lemire. I can see it in the character faces, though, in the way that he draws and the way that he hatches shading and things like that, which is slightly more of kind of an old school kind of approach to it. But no, I like it. I think it is, they handle some of the stranger stuff, like people appearing as panthers and or jaguars and all that. Kind of the way that kind of jumps out and stands out. I think there's some cool stuff they do with color. In terms of when the colors get warm, when they get cold, what Quentin Winters there is doing, there's
And
there's a
the
feel to
obviously
it.
very helpful coloring in the lettering boxes.
Definitely, yeah, yeah, yeah,
Essential.
yeah, yeah. And I think we should also definitely talk about the various status updates. The way they use that is integral in the book, which are updates from, again, the in-universe app is called Chirper, I believe. Which is obviously just Twitter. But yeah, the fact that they use it and how they integrate that and how they use it, is at this point in kind of publication history, public's comics publication was sort of a new thing, right? Like the idea that it had reached saturation enough where you could use it on panel and everyone knows what it is.
Right.
You know,
Yes.
it is a storytelling mechanism outside the regular bounds of here's a narration box, here's a word balloon, whatever it is. We can have social media updates and it can look like this, and we can have all this in there because it has reached a point where anyone picking this up understands what that is. It is no longer new. It's no longer it, at this, I mean, it's no longer like just a hot fad, a fad. It's not a thing. It's not a movement. This is just what it is. This shows that it is fundamental to the way we understand living in society. That it can just be on panel and no one bats an eye at it. Everyone knows what it is.
Yeah.
We've gone past the point of, well, maybe in a couple of years this isn't going to be here anymore. Like even in 2015 when this book started, we knew that this was going to be a part of how we communicated going forward, for good or for ill. At that point we didn't know. Now we know fairly definitively it's gone for ill, but so be it. That's where we are. But seeing that there and how they integrate it, when they jump back, when they jump to which character and we see what their thoughts are and things. At this point in time, this was still kind of an innovative way to integrate that into the story. It's a little more I don't want to say played out now in a more modern book, but we've seen it so often now that it does feel played out. It
Yeah.
was still relatively novel and new, to see it used in this way in a book in 2015.
Yeah, which was this was early indie comic reading period for me.
Mm-hmm.
Was 2015. I guess I've been in it for a couple years, but I mean, my first
Were you back in here in Cincinnati at this point?
no, I was in St. Louis through December 2016, so I didn't move to
Okay,
Cincinnati until
so almost the majority of time of the of this book coming out. So okay, so you were still okay. All right.
which I'm
So you had
actually
just
surprised my local shop wasn't pushing this one because like my local shop had like really lost their minds like in a positive way when Batman 44 came out in New 52, which
Mhm.
was Batman looking into the shooting of an unarmed young black man.
Yeah.
And this was post Ferguson. Scott Snyder was very intentional about it. There was a Rolling Stone magazine article about that issue of Batman. And so, it was very, I was going to say in a positive way. I realize that has connotations,
Yeah.
but it's straight up.
It was
It is,
topical.
it is
It was
a
topical,
woke
yes.
comic shop, which, most comic shops are, even if the owner isn't, the stuff they're selling tends to be on the cutting edge of, being socially progressive. Not to say that there aren't regressive things in comics. Lord knows there are. But comics as a medium, I think, has this amazing ability
It can
to,
definitely.
yeah, especially indie comic.
So that is interesting. Yeah, you're right. So that what you're describing, this does seem like the kind of book, especially early on, be like, hey man, like
It
got a
must have just
character.
been that no one at the shop read it.
It maybe so, maybe so. And again, as I said, this was kind of I said this last week. This was kind of the last stretch of Vertigo 1.0. The first, it would soon after this, DC would shutter Vertigo for the first time and move to their kind of black label thing, and they brought Vertigo back now. And this was a quintessential Vertigo book, for that time period too, for the early 2010 the early aughts 2010 time period. This is the kind of book they were putting out there, and you're right, it's possible it just got lost in the shuffle because Vertigo was even at that point was on its kind of last gasp of breaths, with which is too bad because I Vertigo as a line, as an imprint, is incredibly important to me as a comic reader. So I was always someone who try to keep an eye on just knowing, because that Vertigo stamp, that mark on an issue meant something to me. And like, well, if Vertigo put this out, it's probably worth reading here. But I could see how, it's getting a little lost. And at the time there were plenty of incredible stuff coming out from Image. Boom at this point was 10 years old at that point, 2015. So it was making waves and making inroads into it. And Vertigo, I think maybe at that point seen as that was an older line. People thought about the what used to be on Vertigo, not what was on Vertigo now. So there was
Right.
more of it was
Right.
even at that point, it was still kind of maybe starting to be seen as a legacy brand, not a current one. So maybe that's why I fell through the cracks, because from what you're saying, yeah, this book seems like something that would have been right up your shop's alley. Also knowing that it had, however, tangential ties to the area, and to events in the area, it would have seemed like something that they maybe could have pushed on you or on readers, as it came out.
Honestly, Vertigo may have been a little mainstream for them.
That's possible. That's
I
possible.
mean, this is the
they were-
shop that got me reading, Black and Skeptic, like stuff on Black Mask, which I think is, indie. Like you can't
absolutely.
you don't know if the series will finish because it's always unclear to me whether Black Mask will still be a studio by the end of issue 4.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
And so maybe they felt like Vertigo's owned by DC. They're
That's
not really
fair.
indie anymore.
It is a DC imprint. It's not its own publisher. So yeah, that is possible. But still, I mean, they
But still, they were
responsible
hyping Batman 44. But I think they knew
yes.
this is going to sell
Yeah,
Batman.
yeah.
They
Batman
probably
is still Batman.
right. It's like you can be as indie as you want. Your shop is still going to sell Batman.
Batman is still the barometer for issues sold. How many issues did you sell relative to how much did Batman sell? That is the market standard. Probably still is. It has been for a very long time. So as woke and indie as your shop is, you're not quite as woke to you're not so far that you're gonna not try to sell Batman to people.
Well, and the irony, right, of all of these books that we're doing this summer being about evil billionaires, and still the best-selling comic book is The Benevolent Billionaire.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
like
a version of the bit of a billionaire. Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Well, no, but like that, I think has been the criticism of Batman for the last 10 years of like,
Oh yeah.
upholding the cops, beating up on poor kids, committing crimes, petty crimes and things like that. And they've really tried to reform the character as much as they can within the constraints of still being Bruce Wayne Batman.
Yeah, well, but part of the way one way they've done that is like he doesn't have $1 billion now. He's now
Right.
got a few $1,000,000. So he has just enough to fund being Batman, but he doesn't have enough to like go back and fix the whole city anymore. He can't stop crime because he doesn't have the kind of money anymore. And it's like, well, okay, but like he's still got enough money to have multiple bat caves around and like build gadgets and like
Well,
if
he
you just
owns
wor-
those are liquid assets. Those, he's
but if you just weren't Batman, you'd have money to. So yeah, there's still some issues with that in terms of what that would be. But Batman got his money through generational wealth. He didn't because even in those stories, even in stories like with Batman and even recently in Nightwing, Dick Grayson inherited a bunch of money and became a multimillionaire, and he did the thing that everyone accuses Bruce Wayne of not doing. Like he put it back into his community, the city of Bloodhaven. Even in those stories, there when they meet any sort of other evil billionaire rich person, it's always some kind of tech bro.
right.
Even in those stories, the people with the generational wealth who are doing things ostensibly for good, it's rare that those people are the villains. Old money, things like that is gone. It's all the new money. It's the kids. It's all the specifically new tech. And it's almost always some kind of social media thing, whether that's in a Marvel or a DC superhero book or in an indie book or creator-owned book like Unfollow or Hacktivist, something like that. That it always comes down. It almost always is specifically social media. It's
Right.
never like the person who got, the .com bubble, as we talk about it back in the day, like that was everything. It was all kinds of things on the internet. All bunch of people made a lot of money. Now it's just social media. That is the stereotypical way that someone gets insanely rich very quickly.
Yeah. Which and is by and large true. I mean that.
I guess. Yeah.
It's hard to say people. Well, I guess and then the poor man's version of that is being an influencer. It's like a disproportionate huddle for a lottery ticket.
Yeah.
Of making money.
But those people are using the tools made by someone else, however advantageously on this. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, it is, it's as we travel our road down through the decline of social media here, I don't think we've seen anything, at least in this book here, is less about the actual app itself, right? Because we don't get much about Headspace or about Chirper, other than the updates we know that exist. This is more about, I guess, kind of the general connectivity of people, of society that these apps create, and what, in specific, our billionaire in question, Larry Farrell, what he thinks about society, and what he's out to prove. Maybe starting through creating his app and ending with him giving away his fortune through an app. It's almost like it's maybe like we're tracking his grand view of society and how people are connected and how they relate to each other, and that social media just happens to be the way that those things make they make those connections, I guess. It's less about the app and it's more about what it represents and who the person is behind those kinds of apps. And I think this book further kind of erodes what we think about the people who create these systems and these algorithms.
Yeah, well, yes. And, this is this conversation for another day, but I think there's the whole, like, if he can put his thumb on the scale with this, intentionally or unintentionally, because I think there is always some sense in which, yes, players will manipulate technology knowingly, but there's unspeakable amounts of unknowable bias programmed into things, which has not been thoroughly vetted in AI, but will be the topic of the next 5 years.
Yeah. Who's responsible for coding this is going to affect on what the code does.
Exactly. Yeah.
So,
all right. Well, I think that's all for volume 1 here. Lots of great discussion to be had. I am excited to do volume 2 very, very soon, turn this around and keep the momentum going. Although for the listener, it will all be next Thursday.
Next Thursday.
It'll always be a 1 week away, unless you bank them. No shame in that.
Maybe so.
Bank all kinds of podcasts. But
absolutely. Binge them all at once. So yeah, volume 2, I can do math here, right? Issue 7 through 12. Because that's the next set of 6 there. We'll have a couple more guest artists show up in this volume here. So we'll highlight that when we get to those issues. But if you find them in single issue or in trade, wherever you get your comics, volume 2 of Unfollow.
Sounds good. We will see you next week. Find us StoredArcs.com, Storied Arcs, Blue Sky, all the places, all the things, links in the bio. See you next week.